You notice it first in the jaw, a tightness that arrives before the thought does. Maybe someone spoke over you in a meeting, or cut you off in traffic, or said the one thing they know lands wrong. The body responds before the mind names it. Heat rises through the chest. The breath shortens. The hands might curl slightly, as if preparing for something that will never actually come. This is how anger announces itself, not with a decision, but with a sensation. And if you pause right there, in that first flicker, you might notice something unexpected. The anger feels solid, justified, like a thing you possess. But when you look closely, it moves, it shifts. It is more like weather than stone. Early Buddhist teaching speaks of anger as a fire, not the kind that warms a home, but the kind that consumes the house itself. The Pali word is dosa, sometimes translated as aversion or hatred, but at its heart it means a burning away from, a turning from what is toward what we wish were not. The fire does not need fuel from outside. It generates its own heat. It feeds on the very mind that holds it. When you sit with anger, even for a moment, you begin to see this. The initial spark might have come from something external, a word or action or injustice. But the blaze that follows, the looping thoughts, the imagined arguments, the rehearsed confrontations, these belong to you. The other person has often moved on. The situation may have passed, but the fire keeps burning because you are still adding wood. This is not about blame. It is about seeing clearly. The Buddha did not teach that anger is wrong or sinful. He taught that it is painful, that it burns the one who carries it, that it clouds perception and narrows the world down to a single point of heat. When you are angry, everything becomes fuel. A neutral comment becomes an insult. A moment of silence becomes rejection. The mind, in its burning, transforms the world into evidence for its own story. And yet anger also carries information. Beneath the fire, there is often something tender, a boundary that was crossed, a value that was violated, a part of you that feels unseen or unheard. The fire is not the problem. The fire is a signal. But when you live inside the blaze, you cannot read the signal clearly. You can only feel the heat. So the practice begins with a kind of stepping back. Not suppressing the anger, not pretending it is not there, but creating just enough space to see it as a process rather than a truth. You might notice the heat in your chest and name it silently. Anger is here, not I am angry, which fuses you to the experience, but anger is present, which allows a small gap. In that gap, the breath can return, the body can soften slightly. The fire still burns, but you are no longer standing in the center of it. This is where the metaphor deepens. A fire needs oxygen. It needs containment or it spreads, and it needs something to burn. When you stop feeding it with rumination, with the endless inner arguments and justifications, the fire begins to change. It does not disappear immediately. Anger has momentum, but it loses its grip. It becomes something you can observe rather than something that observes through you. The Buddha taught that anger, like all afflictive emotions, arises from a misunderstanding. We believe that the anger will protect us, that it will right the wrong, that it will make the other person understand. But anger does not clarify, it distorts. It takes a moment of pain and turns it into a story of enemies and sides, of who is right and who is wrong. And in that story, we lose contact with the present moment. We lose the possibility of response. We are left only with reaction, with the automatic blaze. What the practice offers is not the elimination of anger, but a different relationship to it. A way of meeting the fire without becoming the fire, of feeling the heat without letting it consume the whole house. This requires patience. It requires a willingness to sit with discomfort, to let the sensations move through without immediately acting on them. It requires trust that the anger, like all conditioned phenomena, will change if you do not feed it. And so we begin here with the simple recognition that anger is present, that it has a texture, a temperature, a location in the body, that it tells a story, but the story is not the whole truth. We begin by turning toward the fire with curiosity rather than judgment, with spaciousness rather than fusion. We begin by breathing into the heat and asking, quietly, what lies beneath. There is a moment when anger arrives. You know this moment. It comes without invitation, sometimes as a small spark, sometimes as a flash that fills the whole chest. And in that moment, there is a pull to act, to speak, to move, to do something with this heat that has suddenly appeared inside you. This pull is so strong that it feels like truth. It feels like necessity. The anger tells you that you must respond now, that waiting is impossible, that the only relief is to direct this fire outward toward whoever or whatever caused it. And so we act. We speak words we later regret. We make decisions from a place of heat that we would not make from a place of stillness. We throw the coal as the Buddha once described it. But here is what he was pointing to when you grasp a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who burns. Your hand burns first. Your hand burns most. The other person may feel the heat, yes, but you are holding the burning thing. You are the one in direct contact with the fire. This is not poetic language meant to shame you. This is simple observation. Anger, when we act from it without awareness, hurts us before it hurts anyone else. It burns through our body. It disrupts our sleep. It clouds our thinking. It creates distance in our relationships, even when we believe we are defending ourselves. The fire we carry is our own fire. Yet the pull to act on anger is so immediate, so convincing, that most of us never pause to notice this. We are caught in the urgency of the moment. We are caught in the story that anger is telling us. The story says this person did this thing, and therefore I must respond. The story is loud. The story feels important. The story feels true. What if, instead of following the story, you could notice something else first? Imagine a match striking in the dark. There is the moment of friction. There is the sudden brightness. And there is the heat. But before the match becomes a flame, there is something smaller. There is the physical sensation of striking. There is the beginning of heat. If you were to notice that moment, the very first moment of friction, you would have a choice that comes later, after the flame is already burning bright. Anger is like this. It begins not as a story. It does not begin as a thought about what someone did or did not do. It begins in the body. It begins as a sensation. There is heat. There is a tightening. There is a surge of energy. There is a heaviness or a sharpness somewhere in your chest, your throat, your belly. This is the friction. This is before the flame. But we are taught to skip over this. We are taught to move from the sensation directly to the story so quickly that we believe they are the same thing. We feel the heat and immediately we name it, I am angry because this person did this. And the naming becomes the justification. The story becomes the proof that our anger is right, that our anger is necessary, that our anger must be acted upon. What would happen if you could slow this down? Not slow it down in a way that requires effort or willpower, but slow it down simply by paying attention to what is actually occurring in your body before the story takes over completely. The next time you notice anger beginning, you might try this instead of following the thought. Instead of following the pull to act, Simply notice where you feel it. Is it in your chest? Is it in your jaw? Is it in your hands? What is the actual sensation? Is it heat? Is it pressure? Is it a kind of vibration? Can you feel it without naming it as anger yet? Can you feel it as simply sensation? This is not suppression. This is not pushing the anger away. This is not pretending it is not there. This is the opposite. This is turning toward it with curiosity rather than with the urgency to fix it or express it. When you notice the sensation without immediately jumping to the story, something begins to shift. The sensation is still there. The heat is still there. But it is no longer fused with the thought. It is no longer locked together with the narrative about what someone did wrong. They are separate. And in that separation, there is space. There is room to breathe. This is where the match metaphor deepens. When you notice the friction, when you notice the beginning of heat, you are noticing the moment before the flame takes over completely. You are noticing the moment when you still have choice. Not the choice to make the anger disappear, not the choice to become a person who does not feel anger, but the choice to not be completely captured by the urgency of the story. The choice to notice that you are holding something hot, and to notice this before you throw it. The sensation of anger in your body is real. It is not something to be ashamed of. But the sensation and the story are not the same. The heat and the narrative are not the same. And if you can learn to notice the heat first, to feel it directly before the story has completely taken over, you begin to see something. You begin to see that you are the one holding the coal. You are the one who will burn first. And that awareness, that simple noticing, is the beginning of freedom. When anger arrives, something happens that most of us don't notice until much later, if we notice it at all. The initial flare, the moment someone says something cutting, or you remember a betrayal, or you see an injustice. That first moment is sharp and real. But then something else begins. We start to tell ourselves the story again and again. We replay the words. We imagine what we should have said. We rehearse the unfairness of it all. And with each repetition, the fire grows hotter. This is not the anger itself. This is what we do with the anger. There is an old teaching in the Buddhist tradition about two arrows. When the first arrow strikes you, when actual pain or harm arrives, that is suffering that comes from the world. It is real, and it lands. But the second arrow, the one that causes most of our anguish, is the one we shoot at ourselves. It is our reaction to the first arrow. It is the story we build around it, the meaning we assign to it, the way we turn a moment into a narrative that we rehearse over and over. Anger often works exactly this way. Someone does something. That is the first arrow. It touches something tender in us. But then we begin to add logs to the fire. Each time we replay the event in our mind, we are adding another log. Each time we imagine how we should have responded. Each time we rehearse the injustice. Each time we think about what it means about us or about them. We are feeding the flames. The anger does not stay the size it was. It grows because we keep giving it fuel. The remarkable thing is that we often do this without realizing it. We think we are just remembering. We think we are being realistic about what happened. We think we are preparing ourselves for what might happen next. But what we are actually doing is intensifying a feeling that was already difficult. We are making it worse by our own hand. Notice this the next time anger arises. Not in some distant future moment, but the very next time you feel that heat in your chest, that tightness in your jaw, that sense of being wronged. Notice what happens after the initial sting. Does the anger simply arrive and then fade? Or do you find yourself returning to the story? Do you tell it to yourself once, and then it is finished? Or do you tell it again and again, adding new details each time, each repetition making the feeling stronger? This is not about blame. You are not doing something wrong by replaying the story. This is simply how the mind works when it encounters something painful. The mind naturally wants to understand what happened. It wants to make sense of the threat. It wants to prepare. These are not flaws, but they do have a cost. Each time we rehearse the narrative, we are not actually protecting ourselves. We are making the suffering deeper. The fire grows not because the original harm was so large, but because we keep adding wood to it. A single log burns and eventually becomes ash. But if you keep placing new logs on the flames, if you keep blowing on the embers, the fire will burn for hours, for days, for years sometimes. The size of the fire depends not on the first log, but on how many times you return to feed it. Here is where something shifts. When you see this clearly, when you actually notice the difference between the moment of harm and the repetition that follows, something begins to change. Not because you are trying to change it, but because you are seeing it directly. You are no longer lost in the story. You are watching the story being told. The practice is simple, though not always easy. When anger arises, count. Count how many times you mentally repeat the story that triggered it. Do not try to stop. Do not try to suppress the repetition. Simply count. 1 time through the narrative, 2 times, 3. Notice how many times you need to tell yourself the story before the charge begins to diminish. Notice whether the story actually gets smaller, or whether it stays the same size and you simply grow tired of repeating it. Most people are surprised by what they find. They expected that the anger would naturally fade. Instead, they discover that they are the ones keeping it alive. They are the ones returning to the fire. They are the ones adding logs. And they are doing it not because they enjoy it, but because some part of them believes that by rehearsing the story, by staying angry, by keeping the fire burning, they are somehow protecting themselves or making things right. When you count the repetitions, you begin to see this pattern. You begin to see that the anger is not a solid thing that happened to you. It is a process that you are participating in. And the moment you see that clearly, the moment you recognize your own hand in feeding the flames, something loosens. Not dramatically, not all at once, but something shifts. The fire is no longer mysterious. It is no longer something that is simply happening to you. You are seeing it for what it actually is. Logs you are placing, one by one, on embers that could otherwise cool. There is something we believe about anger that keeps us trapped. We believe that if we do not fight it, push it away, or act on it immediately, it will consume us. It will grow larger. It will take over. So we move, we speak, we do something, anything, to prove to ourselves that we are still in control, that the anger does not own us. But there is another possibility, one that feels dangerous at first because it asks us to do the opposite of what our body is screaming for. What if we simply stayed with it? Not with gritted teeth, not with determination or willpower, not as a test of strength, but with the same quality of attention you might give to watching steam rise from a cup of hot tea. You do not command the steam to rise. You do not push it or pull it. You watch it appear, change shape, drift, and dissolve. The steam does what steam does. Your job is only to see it. Anger is like this too, though we rarely treat it that way. When anger arrives, and it will arrive, because you are alive, we have learned to interpret its presence as a problem that needs solving right now. Our chest tightens, Our jaw clenches. Our thoughts become sharp and certain, and we think this must mean something. This must demand action. If I do not respond, if I do not express this, if I do not fix what caused it, then I am weak. I am a doormat. The anger will fester and destroy me from within. This is the fear that runs deepest. Not the anger itself, but the fear that stillness with anger equals annihilation. Yet the Zen tradition offers something quieter. It says sit with what is, without preference, and watch it change on its own. Not as a technique to make anger disappear, not as a spiritual bypass, but as a direct observation of how things actually move when we stop interfering. When you watch steam rise from a cup, you are not trying to make it beautiful or trying to make it stop. You are simply allowing your attention to rest on something that is already happening. The steam rises because the water is hot. It cools as it meets the air. It disperses. This is not a problem. This is not a failure. This is simply the nature of steam. Your anger has a nature too. It arises because conditions are present, because something feels threatened or violated or unheard. The anger is real. It is not something you need to shame yourself for feeling. But like the steam, it has a movement. It has a temperature. It has a lifespan. When you are not busy resisting it or amplifying it with your thoughts, it actually moves. It actually changes. The problem is that we have never truly tested this. We have always done something. We have always moved, spoken, acted, or at least tensed our body against the feeling. So we have no direct evidence that anger can exist in us without us needing to do anything about it. We only have the theory, the fear, that it will destroy us if we do not. What happens in the body when anger is present? There is heat. There is a quickening. There is an impulse toward movement or speech. These are sensations. They are intense, yes, but they are not permanent. They are not solid. They change moment to moment, just as the steam changes shape as it rises. If you were to sit very still with anger, not suppressing it, not acting on it, but simply allowing your attention to rest on it, the way you would rest your eyes on steam, what would you notice? Perhaps you would notice that the intensity has a rhythm. It rises and falls. Perhaps you would notice that the thought patterns that feed it are not as solid as they seem. Perhaps you would notice that underneath the heat there is something else. Sadness, maybe, or fear. Or perhaps you would notice that the anger simply begins to cool on its own, without any effort from you. This is not mystical. This is not asking you to believe anything. It is asking you to look directly. The invitation is simple, though it may feel uncomfortable at first. The next time anger arises in you, and you will know when it does, you might try something. Set a timer for 3 minutes, just 3. Find a place where you can be alone, where you do not need to speak or move or do anything at all. Sit with your anger the way you would sit with steam rising from a cup. Notice where you feel it in your body. Notice the sensations without trying to change them. Notice the thoughts that arise. Notice how the intensity moves and shifts. Do not try to make it go away. Do not try to make it stay. Simply watch. 3 minutes is not long. It is long enough to feel the discomfort of not acting. It is long enough to begin to see that the anger does not actually need your action to exist. It is long enough to notice something shift, some softening, some slight cooling, as if the steam is naturally dispersing into the air. When the timer sounds, you can move. You can speak. You can act if action is truly needed. But something will have changed. You will have touched, directly, the possibility that anger can be present without destroying you. That stillness is not weakness. That watching is a form of wisdom. There is a heat that rises in us sometimes. A tightness in the chest, a quickening of the breath, a sense that something is deeply wrong. We call it anger. But if you sit quietly with that fire for a moment, not to extinguish it, but simply to notice what it is made of, you may discover something underneath the flames. Anger does not arrive empty. It always carries something with it. A wish, a demand, an insistence that things should be other than they are right now. Consider a moment when you felt truly angry. Not a small irritation, but a real fire. Someone said something unkind, a plan fell apart. You were treated unfairly. In each case, there was a collision between what you wanted and what actually happened. The wanting came first. The anger came after. This is worth sitting with, because most of us believe the anger is the primary thing. We think the fire is what we need to address, but the fire is a symptom. The wanting is the root. All suffering, as the Buddha taught, comes from this. We want reality to be other than it is in this moment, not in some distant future, right now. We want the person to have spoken differently. We want the plan to have succeeded. We want to be treated as we believe we deserve, and when reality refuses to comply with our demands, we push, we resist, we burn. This resistance has a particular quality. It is not the same as grief, though they can feel similar. Grief accepts that something is gone and feels the loss. Aversion, which is what anger rests upon, refuses to accept what is here. It says no. It says this should not be. And in that refusal, we create a second arrow. The first arrow is the event itself. The second arrow is our pushing against it. Imagine standing in a river and trying to push the current backward. The harder you push, the more force you must exert. The water does not care about your effort. It flows as it flows. Your arms tire. Your frustration grows. And yet the river continues. This is what aversion feels like in the body and mind. We are pushing against something that cannot be stopped by our resistance. We are pushing against what is actually happening. The anger you feel is often not really anger at the other person or at the situation. It is anger at reality itself for not conforming to your image of how things should be. This is a subtle but crucial distinction. It means the problem is not primarily with them. It is with the wanting that came before the anger arose. You might notice this in small moments. Someone is late to meet you. Before the anger comes, there is a wanting. You wanted them to be on time. You wanted your schedule to proceed as planned. You wanted to be treated as someone whose time matters. These are not unreasonable wants, but they are wants nonetheless. And when they collide with what actually happens, the fire starts. Or consider a more tender example. Someone you love is withdrawn and quiet. You wanted them to be warm with you. You wanted to feel close. When they are not, something in you resists. It refuses. It says this is not how it should be. And from that refusal, anger often grows, or its quieter cousin, resentment. The Buddha's insight was not that wanting is wrong. It was that the collision between wanting and reality creates suffering. The wanting itself is natural, but the insistence that reality must bend to your wanting, the pushing against the river, this is where the pain lies. So what happens if you do not push? What if you simply notice the wanting without acting from it? This is where the practice becomes quiet and intimate. The next time you feel that heat rising, you might pause, not to suppress it, not to judge yourself for feeling it, but simply to ask yourself one question, very gently. What am I wanting that I do not have right now? Do not answer quickly. Let the question sit. The answer may not come in words. It may come as a sensation, a knowing. Perhaps you wanted to be heard, and you were not. Perhaps you wanted things to go smoothly, and they did not. Perhaps you wanted someone to care in a way they did not. The wanting might be large or small. It does not matter. What matters is that you see it clearly. When you name the wanting, something shifts. The anger does not necessarily disappear, but it becomes visible. It stops being a force that moves you and becomes something you can observe. You can see the river flowing. You can feel your arms still raised in resistance. And in that seeing, you have a choice that was not available before. You might choose to lower your arms, not because the river will change, but because you will stop exhausting yourself. You might choose to accept what is happening while still acting wisely. You might choose to grieve what you wanted without burning. This is not resignation. It is not weakness. It is the strength that comes from stopping the fight with what is real. The fire within you is not your enemy. It is a messenger. It arrives to tell you that something you wanted has not come to pass. When you listen to that message instead of acting from the heat, you begin to understand yourself differently. You see the wanting. You see the aversion. And in that clear seeing, the grip loosens. When anger rises in us, something happens that we rarely notice until much later, if we notice it at all. The fire comes, and we become the fire. Our awareness narrows to the thought, the grievance, the heat. We forget we are standing on solid ground. We forget we have a body. We forget we are breathing. This forgetting is not a small thing. It is the heart of why anger feels so consuming, so total, so like the only truth in the room. When we are caught in anger, we have left ourselves. We have stepped into the smoke, and the smoke has become our entire world. The Buddha noticed this long ago. He saw that human beings have a tendency to believe their thoughts completely, to take their emotions as final truth. But he also noticed something else. He noticed that we always have access to something simpler, something truer. We always have the breath. We always have the body. These are not opinions. They are not stories. They are happening right now. Think of anger as a thick smoke filling a room. When you are inside the smoke, you cannot see the walls. You cannot see the door. You cannot see anything but the smoke itself, and it feels endless. But the smoke does not fill the entire sky. Above the room, above the smoke, there is clear air. There is space. There is light. The clear air does not argue with the smoke. It does not try to push the smoke away. It simply exists, and it is always there. The breath is like that clear air. It does not fight the anger. It does not judge it or try to make it go away. But when we return our attention to the breath, we step out of the smoke. We remember that we are not only the fire, we are also the one who is breathing. This is why the Buddha taught a simple practice. He said, breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. This is not complicated language. It is not a philosophy. It is an invitation to notice what is already true. When you breathe in, you know you are breathing in. The knowing is already there. You are simply bringing your attention to it. When anger is strong, we do not need a long meditation. We do not need to sit in silence for an hour. We need something immediate. We need to remember that we have a body. We need to feel the ground beneath us. We need to sense the breath moving in and out. There is a practice that can help with this. It is so simple that it might seem too simple, but simplicity is often where power lies. Place one hand on your belly. Just rest it there, not pressing, not holding. Simply resting. Now breathe naturally. You are not trying to change your breath. You are not trying to make it deeper or slower. You are simply noticing what is already happening. As you breathe in, feel your belly rise under your hand. Feel the expansion, feel the space being created. There is no rush. There is no performance. Just the simple rising of the belly as air enters. Then as you breathe out, feel the belly fall. Feel it soften. Feel the release. This is happening in your body right now. This is real. This is solid ground. Do this 10 times. Not because the number 10 is magical, but because 10 breaths is enough time for something to shift. 10 breaths is long enough for the smoke to begin to clear. It is long enough for the body to remember that it exists. As you feel the rise and fall under your hand, you might notice that your mind is still busy with the anger. You might still hear the thoughts, still feel the heat. This is fine. You are not trying to make the anger go away. You are simply placing your attention somewhere else. You are simply remembering that you are more than the fire. With each breath, with each rise and fall under your hand, you are stepping slightly out of the smoke. You are finding the clear air, not by fighting the smoke, not by denying it, but by remembering that there is more to you than anger. There is the breath. There is the body. There is the simple fact of being alive right now. By the time you have felt 10 full breaths, something will have changed. Not everything. The anger may still be there, but you will be different. You will be more present. You will have returned to your own ground. You will have remembered that you are not only the fire, you are the one who is breathing. This is the practice. This is the way back. Not through understanding anger better, but through remembering the body. Not through thinking about peace, but through feeling the breath. The clear air is always there, above the smoke. You simply have to remember to look. There is something we do with anger that keeps it alive long after the moment that sparked it has passed. We take that heat, that sharp and urgent feeling, and we hold it. We carry it forward into the next hour, the next day, sometimes the next year. And the strange thing is that we do this as if the anger itself still matters, as if holding it changes anything about what happened. Think of a fire that burned yesterday. The flames are gone, the heat has cooled. But if you were to scoop up the ashes from that fire and hold them in your hands, keeping them close, protecting them, what would you have? Not warmth, not light, just the weight of something that has already burned itself out. This is what we often do with old anger. The anger itself was real when it arose. In that moment, there was genuine heat. Someone said something unkind, or did something that felt like a betrayal, or simply did not see us the way we needed to be seen. The anger came, and it had a purpose. It signaled that something mattered to us. It gave us energy. But that moment has passed. The conditions that created the anger are no longer present. And yet we continue to hold it, to turn it over in our minds, to rehearse the story of what happened, to imagine conversations we wish we had had. When you notice this happening, there is something useful to observe. The anger you are feeling right now is not the same anger you felt in the original moment. This is worth sitting with for a while. The original anger was a direct response to something that was happening. It was sharp, immediate, alive. What you carry now is a memory of that anger mixed with your thoughts about it, your judgments about whether you were right to feel it, your ideas about what it means about the other person or about yourself. It is a story you keep telling yourself, and stories, unlike the original moment, can go on indefinitely. This is where impermanence becomes not just a concept, but something you can actually feel. Everything changes. The moment passes. The person who felt that anger is not quite the same person you are now. Your understanding has shifted, even if only slightly. Your body has changed, Your circumstances have changed. And yet we often treat our anger as if it is a fixed thing, something that must be preserved and protected because it proves something true about what happened. There is a gentleness that comes from seeing this clearly. It is not about forcing yourself to forgive or to let go. It is simpler than that. It is about noticing that the fire has already gone out, and that the only thing keeping you warm now is the ash you are holding. What happens if you bring to mind an anger that you have carried for a while? Not necessarily the biggest anger you have ever felt, but one that still visits you sometimes. One that you know is old, but that still has some weight to it. You might remember the situation clearly, or the details might have become fuzzy. Either way, there is likely still a feeling attached to it. Notice what that feeling is like now. As you sit with it, you might notice that it is not as sharp as it once was. It may not have the same urgency. It may not demand the same immediate response. There may be other feelings woven through it now. Sadness, perhaps, or resignation, or even a kind of wariness at carrying it. These are the signs that time has already done something. The fire has already cooled. You are not the same person who felt the original heat. There is no need to do anything with this observation. There is no need to force the anger away or to convince yourself that you should not feel it. Simply notice what is actually present now, in this moment, when you recall that old anger. Notice how the feeling moves in your body, or how it seems to hover in your mind. Notice whether it still feels urgent, or whether it has become something more like a habit. A familiar story you reach for sometimes without even thinking about it. As you continue to observe, you might begin to see that even strong feelings are not permanent. They arise, they have their moment, and they naturally begin to fade. The anger that once consumed your attention is now something you can look at. It no longer controls you in the way it once did. This shift happens not because you forced it, or because you decided to be a better person. It happens because of the nature of experience itself. Everything that arises passes away. This is the quiet truth that the old teaching points to. Clinging to the past is like carrying yesterday's ashes in your hands. You cannot warm yourself with them. You cannot use them to light a new fire. You can only hold them, and in holding them, you keep your hands full of something that no longer serves you. What becomes possible when you see this? Not immediately, perhaps, but gradually, as you notice again and again that the fire has already gone out, something shifts. Your grip loosens. Your hands become free for something else. There is a story that lives quietly in many of us. It says that anger is strength. That when we feel the heat rising in the chest, the tightening in the jaw, the sharp clarity that seems to cut through confusion. This is power. This is what will protect us. This is what will make us unmovable, unbreakable, solid as stone. And yet, if we pause long enough to feel what anger actually does in the body, we might notice something different. The heat does not feel like strength. It feels like burning. The clarity does not feel like sight. It feels like a narrowing. And the solidity we imagine, the sense of being unshakable, often crumbles the moment the anger passes, leaving us more fragile than before. Not less. There is a teaching from Zen that speaks of bamboo in a storm. The bamboo does not stand rigid against the wind. It bends. It yields. It moves with the force that comes against it. And when the storm passes, the bamboo is still there, still rooted, still whole. The oak that refuses to bend, that meets the wind with all its hardness, may snap. The bamboo teaches us something that anger obscures, that yielding is not weakness. That flexibility is not fragility. When we believe anger makes us strong, we are believing something that feels true in the moment, but does not hold up over time. The stone does not become stronger because water wears against it. The water does not fight the stone. It simply moves. It finds the smallest opening, the tiniest imperfection, and it returns again and again, patient and soft. Over years, over decades, the stone is shaped not by force but by persistence and gentleness. The water never hardens itself. It never becomes rigid or hot. It simply continues. This is not a metaphor about winning. It is about what actually happens when we meet what is difficult with something other than fire. Anger arises. This is not wrong. Anger is part of what we are. It comes when we feel threatened, when something we care about is at stake, when we perceive injustice or violation. The arising of anger is not the problem. The problem is what we do with it next. And most often, what we do is we trust it. We believe it is telling us the truth. We believe it is protecting us. We pour our energy into it, we feed it, we act from it. And in that moment, we become like the stone, hard, brittle, increasingly fragile beneath the surface. There is a different possibility. It begins not with fighting the anger, not with trying to eliminate it or deny it, but with a simple shift in how we hold it. When the heat rises, when you feel that familiar tightening, there is a moment, sometimes very small, sometimes more spacious, where you can pause, not to suppress, not to push away, but to turn toward yourself with the same kindness you would offer to someone you love who is suffering. This is not sentimentality. It is not bypassing the anger or pretending it is not there. It is meeting the part of you that is burning with something softer than fire. When anger arises, you might silently offer yourself one kind phrase, not as a command to yourself, not as a demand to feel better, but as you would speak to a friend who is in pain. You might say, "This is hard," or "I see that you are hurting," or simply, "It is okay. I am here." The words matter less than the quality of attention, the willingness to be present with what is burning without needing to burn back. What happens when we do this is subtle. The anger does not necessarily disappear, but something shifts. The grip loosens. The sense of being trapped by the heat begins to ease. And in that ease, we often see more clearly. We see what the anger was protecting, what vulnerability it was guarding. We see the fear underneath. And from that place of sight, from that place of having touched our own tenderness, we are far more likely to respond to what is actually in front of us rather than to react from the story we have been telling. The bamboo does not need to become water. It does not need to dissolve itself. It simply bends. It remains rooted while it moves. And you can do this too. You can remain yourself, remain committed to what matters to you, remain clear about what needs to change, and still choose not to harden, still choose not to burn, still choose to meet the fire with something that does not require you to become fire yourself. The practice is simple, though not always easy. When anger arises, before you act, before you speak, offer yourself one moment of kindness, one phrase, one breath where you are not at war with what is happening inside you. This is not weakness. This is the deepest form of strength, the strength to remain human even in the presence of heat, the strength to bend and not break, the strength to let water wear away stone, knowing that persistence and gentleness, over time, shape the world far more than any force ever could. We've spent this time together looking at anger, not to fix it or banish it, but to understand what it actually is when it arises. You've seen how it moves through the body, how thought feeds it, how the mind tightens around a story of wrong. And perhaps you've also noticed that anger, for all its heat and urgency, is not as solid as it pretends to be. When you meet anger with awareness instead of reaction, something shifts. Not immediately, not dramatically, but quietly. The fire doesn't always go out right away. Sometimes it flickers. Sometimes it subsides and returns. But in that moment of seeing it clearly, you are no longer entirely consumed by it. There is space. And in that space, you have a choice you didn't know was there. This doesn't mean you become passive. It doesn't mean you stop caring about what matters. The Buddha never taught indifference. He taught clarity. When you see anger for what it is, a conditioned response to perceived threat or harm, you can still act. But the action comes from a different place. It comes from understanding rather than reactivity, from firmness rather than fury. Some situations call for boundaries. Some require you to speak clearly, even sharply. But there is a difference between acting from wisdom and acting from the blaze of anger itself. Wisdom can be strong. It can be direct. But it doesn't carry the same residue. It doesn't leave you shaking, depleted, tangled in regret. Over time, as you continue to observe anger when it arises, you may begin to notice patterns. Certain triggers appear again and again. Certain thoughts loop in predictable ways. This is not a failure. This is information. Each time anger comes, it offers you another chance to see how your mind works, how suffering is constructed moment by moment. And each time you meet it with patience, with breath, with the willingness to feel it without becoming it, you are training the mind in a different direction. You are loosening the old grooves. You are making space for something steadier to grow. There will be days when you forget everything we've talked about. The anger will rise and you will be swept into it before you even realize what's happening. This is part of the path. No one walks it perfectly. The practice is not about perfection. It's about returning. Again and again, with gentleness, you come back to awareness. You come back to breath. You come back to the body, to this moment, to what is actually here. And in that returning, something quiet begins to settle. Not the absence of anger, but a different relationship to it. You start to see it arrive. You start to feel the first heat in the chest, the first tightening in the jaw. And instead of being pulled under, you can pause. You can breathe. You can ask yourself what this moment actually requires. This is freedom, not the kind that arrives in a flash of insight and solves everything forever, but the kind that grows slowly, through practice, through patience, through the willingness to meet yourself exactly as you are. If you'd like to continue exploring these teachings, there are other reflections on this channel that may support your practice, but there's no rush. What matters is what you do with what you've heard here, how you carry it into the ordinary moments of your life. So I'll leave you with this. The next time anger arises, and it will, what would it be like to meet it not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a teacher showing you where you still believe you can control what cannot be controlled? What would it be like to feel the fire fully, without feeding it, and see what remains when the flames quiet? What is actually here, beneath the anger, waiting to be seen?